Hello, I'm Alexander Rose, the Executive Director here at Long Now. I'm coming to you from the Interval here in San Francisco, where I will be joined by our speaker tonight, Jason Tester, to watch the pre-recorded version of his talk, along with answering questions from you all afterwards. Jason is a Foresight researcher with the Institute for the Future here in San Francisco and has recently been exploring where futurism, sexual orientation, and identity meet. Tonight, he's going to give us a taste of that research and show us how looking at the future through an LGBTQ lens can help benefit us all. Welcome, Jason Tester.
Thank you, Xander. Thank you all for having me here at Long Now. As Xander said, I am Jason, and I'm on a 20-year journey to make sense of my queerness, which has been a part of my life for about that long. I've also been a professional futurist for about the same amount of time, 20 years. And to prove it to you, here's an aged image of what I might look like at age 60. Now, I've long suspected that these two halves of my life weren't a coincidence. And I think I've now discovered why, and I'm excited to really share that with you tonight. I'm trusting most of the Long Now audience will know the basic terms of sexual orientation and gender identity that I'll be using today. But I do want to define the word queer, because we really can't start talking about it until I do. So what is queer? Well, as an adjective, queer describes all the sexual and gender identities other than straight and cisgender. So lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people may all identify with the word queer. Queer is sometimes used to express that sexuality and gender can be complicated, can change over time, and might not fit neatly into either or identities like male or female, gay or straight. So when I say queer the future, I mean it in two ways. And this first way is based around queer the adjective. And that's, I want to identify the future forces that will disproportionately disrupt the lives of LGBTQ people over the next 20 to 30 years. I want to center our lives in Foresight research and futures narratives, and especially to imagine interventions to at least rebalance these imbalanced impacts. As one example of a Foresight question I'm working with, how will caregiving assistance and aging-in-place technologies deal with LGBTQ people and their relationships? It won't come as a shock to learn that LGBT elders are much more likely to have not had children, up to 3 to 4 times more likely. But even today, 20% of LGBT older adults say they have no one to call in a time of crisis. That is 10 times the general elderly population. And a mere 8% of senior housing centers offer services targeted at LGBT older adults. We're already deep in a caregiving crisis between supply and need. And it's likely that LGBTQ people will need technologies of care more than any other demographic. Another question I'm exploring is, will AI and other intelligent systems built with cisgender heterosexual training data constantly reinforce the gender binary? Imagine bathrooms in the future, particularly in conservative areas or regions of the world, equipped with vision recognition that scan for biological markers or stereotypical gender expressions before they would actually admit someone. It's not hard to imagine a future where more of us are living as gender fluid while surrounded by binary bias. Machine intelligence programmed without any exposure to other expressions or experiences of gender. And last but not least, there's the big stuff that will affect us all. A study that came out last May discovered that in a business as usual climate scenario, in the absence of migration, 1/3 of the global population is projected to experience a mean annual temperature of greater than or equal to 29 degrees Celsius. And that's about 84 degrees Fahrenheit, which is currently only found in about 0.8% of the Earth's land surface, and that's mostly concentrated in the Sahara. So the report goes on to say, specifically, 3.5 billion people will be exposed to a mean annual temperature of greater than or equal to 29 degrees Celsius, living in a Sahara-like climate. I read that, and that's a shocking statistic. It's truly hard to comprehend. But since I've been doing this work, I now take 10% of these impossibly large numbers to understand the impact on people who are likely to identify in the coming decades as queer or not totally heterosexual. So we take that same sentence and we queerify it, and we get specifically 350 million queer people will be exposed to mean annual temperatures greater than or equal to 29 degrees Celsius. Now, 3.5 billion people living in a Sahara-like climate is likely to yield severe constraints of vital resources and overall miserable conditions. But now, imagine being queer or transgender, living in this newly inhospitable climate that's located in a region of the planet that's already inhospitable to your very existence. Life in that scenario sounds pretty hellish. Another report last year projected that up to 1.2 billion people could be displaced by climate change by 2050, by mid-century. Now, applying the same queer math, the same headline reads, climate crisis could displace 120 million queer people. Now, my goal when I query these numbers isn't to advocate for my people at the expense of other groups, or to create an us versus them mentality, but it's simply to call out that large areas of the planet are rapidly becoming doubly inhospitable to queer lives, who should have equal rights to the human universals of love, happiness, and true expression. In the coming decades, we are likely to face mass migration at nearly unimaginable levels, but also unprecedented resource scarcity and triage, and ultimately, an inability to provide the necessities of life for everyone that needs them. So here are a couple of concrete examples of this. According to the UN, 5 billion people could have poor access to fresh water by 2050. And as early as 2030, global water demand is expected to outstrip supply by 40%. And lastly, the UN estimates that the planet will need twice as much food in 2050 as it does today, while grain yields decline as temperatures increase. Now, I know that these aren't uniquely LGBTQ issues, but they're likely to disproportionately affect queer people, given current statistical realities like this. 27% of LGBT adults experienced food insecurity in the prior year, compared to only 17% of non-LGBT adults. And 22% of LGBT people in the US live in poverty, compared to only 16%. So given these disproportionate statistical realities today, it's very likely that they will extend into the future, and we'll see these same disproportionate impacts going forward. So if distribution of critical resources is already this out of balance, when we have plenty of food and water to go around today, imagine a world when we don't. I hope LGBTQ people will fare equally, but I truly fear we won't. The purpose of my life has now become, if we are indeed all going extinct, let's go extinct together as equals. Which brings me to the first thesis of Queering the Future. And I believe that we as a queer and allied community have one generation, roughly 20 to 30 years, to achieve a basic floor of LGBTQ respect and dignity across the planet before things get truly, unambiguously, critically dire for billions of people. And this must be widespread lived reality found in the majority of hearts and minds of a culture, not just toothless legislative proclamations. I mean, not just, would you let your bisexual neighbor borrow some of your water rations for her family? But would you offer your trans customer shelter from the heat, or your gay distant cousin a seat in your raft? Unfortunately, that scenario of mass acceptance seems unlikely in the relatively short time frame demanded of it, and a scary prospect for hundreds of millions of LGBTQ adults and young adults if we don't achieve it. But perpetually looming right around the corner is another potential existential threat to my people. Last year, the largest study of the biology of homosexuality was conducted using genetic data from 23andMe and the UK Biobank, so about 500,000 participants total. Their conclusion was that some genes can account for about 1/3 of the influence over whether someone has ever had same-sex sex at least once in their lives. But not all geneticists supported this research. Many in the LGBT affinity group of the very institute leading this study were opposed, including a colleague of the research leader who said in part, "I have yet to see a compelling argument that the potential benefits of this study outweigh its potential harms." And indeed, every year, and I've been studying the biology of sexuality for years, there are new groundbreaking studies. There are also ongoing investigations into epigenetic mechanisms of sexuality and a potential connection to hormonal conditions in the womb. We're doing a decent, if slow, job at banning so-called gay cures. Now, these are deeply harmful psychological treatments, passing off as beneficial therapies. But what if a gay vaccine became possible, cheaply, at scale, available for everyone? I'll grant you, this is a wild card scenario, low probability, but speaking as a queer man myself, very extremely high impact. But please keep watching after I say this, but I cannot totally dismiss the notion that a gay vaccine would be all bad. It might offer the potential to eliminate the suffering of hundreds of millions of LGBTQ people not yet born, especially in regions that are likely to become inhospitable to queerness, and which happen to be those regions becoming literally inhospitable to humanity itself. To be clear, it wasn't lost on me that I might be turning into a queer man considering eugenics against his own people. But I am deeply afraid for our future, between the prospect of a century of triaging water and food for hundreds of millions of queer people, while seeming closer than ever to true understanding of the biology of homosexuality. I'll admit that these are deep-seated existential fears. But I also need to flip that fear, which leads me to my second meaning of queer the future. Queer can also be used as a verb, and this definition is proposed by Charlie Glickman. As he proposed, fundamentally, queering is an act of ongoing transformation, both within ourselves and in relation to the world around us. To queer something is to take a look at its foundations and question them. We can explore its limits, its biases, its boundaries. We can look for places where there's elasticity or discover ways where we can transform it into something new. To queer is to examine our assumptions and decide which of them we want to keep, change, discard, or play with. So I started asking, does queerness confer any sort of advantage, especially for the wild future world we're headed towards? What even is queerness, beyond the theory that we help the tribe raise kids? despite, or maybe because of all the trauma and marginalization that can come from being born queer, in any family, in any city, in any country in the world, have we created something in our culture found in the periphery and underground that has been waiting for this moment? What if queer culture itself, with some surprising human universals across the globe, is itself a cultural evolutionary mutation, ready to confer advantages of survival and resilience on the larger population? The core irony, of course, that these traits are sourced from a group of people who cannot reproduce themselves, but may be able to help humanity as a whole adapt and thrive into the future. Which leads me to thesis number 2, and that's that the queer perspective is made up of some surprisingly shared traits and tendencies that will be useful for societies and people to thrive in the coming decades ahead. Put another way, queerness can keep things cool in hotter futures. To date, I've identified 5 traits that can answer both of these questions. What is queerness, and what mindsets and practices will confer success in the future we're likely headed towards? A queer future could be more than it is today, more transformative, more equitable, hell, even more fabulous for everyone with a touch of a queer eye. Or maybe it's actually the future itself that's already becoming more queer, and all of us need to play catch up. I can be your guide, like Virgil in the Inferno, or the MC from Cabaret, or any one of the hosts from Queer Eye, all rolled into one. Of course, queerness is more than these 5 traits, and success in the future will require more skills than this list. But I hope seeing queerness and the future in conversation together like this sparks some novel insights about how you approach the future, the lenses and biases that we all bring to our forecasting. So think of this as a guide to how to queer the future. And step number 1 is to question prevailing systems. Queerness fundamentally exists in opposition to arguably the most prevailing system in the human condition, which is heterosexual reproduction. In fact, the DNA of queerness is suspicion or outright rejection of norms, orthodoxy, and continuation scenarios. Because norms and continuation typically kept us miserable or dead for millennia. A default to question the unquestionable is a strong foundation to readily envision transformative alternatives and original ways of doing and being. Jose Esteban Munoz wrote Cruising Utopia just as the light at the end of the tunnel was shining towards the end of the AIDS epidemic, and we could begin to see queerness again for its positivity and for its hopefulness. And he wrote, queerness is essentially about the rejection of a here and now and an insistence on potentiality or concrete possibility for another world. And this is an infamous pamphlet that was passed out by ACT UP in the 1990 New York Gay Pride Parade. Being queer means leading a different sort of life. It's not about the mainstream, profit margins, patriotism, patriarchy, or being assimilated. It's not about executive directors, privilege, and elitism. It's about being on the margins, defining ourselves. Well, many of us first heard of prison and police abolition this summer with many of the Black Lives Matter riots. Resisting and questioning the dominant systems of police and incarceration in the carceral state have long been in the DNA of queerness itself, going all the way back to the 1966 Compton's cafeteria riots here in San Francisco, or 3 years later, at the root of the Stonewall riots, which was an anti-police demonstration. And as noted activist Dr. Angela Davis has pointed out, as is true for so much of queer history, it was transgender people who actually pointed the way to this resistance. Dr. Davis says, we support the trans community precisely because the trans community has taught us how to challenge that which is totally accepted as normal. If it is possible to challenge the gender binary, then we can certainly effectively resist prisons and police. Now, coming out is also a form of questioning the prevailing systems. By choosing to come out, queer people go through a process. They start a personal journey that consciously places them on the margins of what is quantitatively mainstream. And that comes with a double-edged sword. You no longer have an autopilot, the same as many of your straight heterosexual friends do. And rather than being superfluous to change, the margins are in fact the foundry of the future where societies innovate and grow. So the very act of coming out, the very act of declaring yourself a queer person is itself questioning the mainstream system and starting to make the future in a new way. Our second step in how to queer the future is about rejecting binaries and binary thinking. Most forecasts of work and life in the future imagine greater fluidity in our identities, our preferences, self-expression, and our communications and interactions. But queerness found comfort with nuance outside of categories early on, simply because we've been forced to craft our own alternatives to most institutions in society. Queer adaptations to the binaries of married or single, or family or friend, or even our own internal compasses of attraction and gender in each moment, often begin like all novel futures as outliers. If not considered fully deviant, then certainly not accepted by the mainstream. Before time passes, they're reconsidered for their benefits and suddenly have widespread appeal. Let's take the gender binary, for example. The gender binary is so entrenched in our lives that we will literally explode the world to reinforce it. These are scenes from gender binary reveal parties over the past year in which couples dramatically reveal the gender of their child through a pink or blue substance, such as exploding smoke. The binary is so reinforced that so many couples have taken this to an extreme with their reveals, inadvertently lighting tens of thousands of acres on fire. Now, that biology does not equal identity often gets lost in the spectacle. Binary defenders have crashed planes, enlisted alligators, backfired trucks, and gotten into fights and kicked out of Applebee's. And most unfortunately, once exploded a pipe bomb into a guest's skull, killing her instantly. As The Atlantic put it, how many people have to die before we're done with gender reveals? And I would ask, with gender itself. Another example of resisting binaries comes to us from sex columnist Dan Savage and his term that he coined about 10 years ago called monogamish. And he coined this term to describe the arrangement that he has with his husband for occasional extramarital sex with other people and the rules and the requirements that go with that condition. Savage was aiming to create a more realistic sexual ethic that would prize honesty, a little flexibility, and when necessary, forgiveness. Something to live between promiscuity and monogamy, which Savage considers right for many, but unnatural for most. And so again, another queer adaptation to a heteronormative binary. I could have put up many headlines here to show just how queer the younger generations are proving to be than their older counterparts. Teens these days are queer AF, study says. Only 48% of Gen Zs identify as exclusively heterosexual, compared to 65% of millennials aged 21 to 34. Those belonging to Generation Z also rejected the gender binary while shopping. Only 44% said they always bought clothes designed for their own gender, versus 54% of millennials. So as we can see, the gender binary, at least with these new younger generations, is falling fast. Our next step in our journey to how to queer the future is connect intersectionally. Now, this really starts from an assumption that a more egalitarian and broadly prosperous future seems difficult to achieve if we can't agree to live and interact in both deep diversity and deep harmony with each other. As simple as it sounds, working at widespread scale to acknowledge and understand that the lived experiences of people from different backgrounds will be different is a very hard notion for many people to truly grasp, including others' experiences of discrimination and privilege, particularly realities of people of color, but also the lives of those with disabilities and people with fewer means than ourselves. This concept is known as intersectionality. While relatively simple to convey, and can be very difficult to put into practice. But without this basic floor of mutual respect and acceptance, we may not survive. Intersectionality is arguably the most important skill for us making it into the future. If so many of our most talented community members hold back from their true selves, their full creativity, their full joy and passion from the unprecedented task we face of remaking the world, because the fullness of their identities feels unwelcome, we do not get all of the ideas that we need to make it into the next world. This is where I have to be the first to admit that queerness, and particularly white queerness, is far from perfect at making this future our reality. The first gay rights groups formed after Stonewall were deeply intersectional and multiracial. And many argue that the recent focus on gay marriage took us away from the more important issues of economic and employment equity. As one signal that the queer community is trying to re-queer its own future, we've amended the pride flag to acknowledge and center the lives and importance of queer people of color in our movement, adding black and brown stripes on top of the already 7-color rainbow. One way in which queer people as a community do have an advantage is through the shared advantage of marginalization. One experience of marginalization predisposes you to greater understanding of compound marginalizations that other people may face. One way to think about intersectionality is as a tool for augmented empathy. Empathy, of course, will be a vital skill in this increasingly crowded, automated, and unequal, polarized, and mediated century so far. Understanding the way another person encounters the world, accepted or shunned by their peers, bosses, and strangers, is a deeply human act. Now, as we're talking about practicing intersectionally, I want to make a bit of a side note here to say that I firmly believe that the future of the future is being created by transgender women of color and gender non-binary people of color, and that we should all trust their leadership, particularly those of us in the queer community. I can't highly recommend enough the documentary The Future of Trans by Amara Jones and the Trans Agenda for Liberation's Call to Action to grow your understanding of their deeply intersectional lives. Additionally, the exciting intersectional futurism of people like Lonnie Brooks, who's pioneering Afro-queer futures, and whose Long Now talk you can easily Google and watch. Our next step in how to queer the future is one very much related to some fundamentals of queerness, embracing pleasure and joy. Historically, queerness has long prioritized feelings of pleasure and joy as indicators of happiness and well-being, far before modern medicine accepted their value. But not just medicinally, queerness has spoken of these as essential precursors to unspeakable heights of creativity and uninhibited ideation. Basically, foundations to imagining radically new futures. But even this had become taboo, since queer pleasure was deeply stigmatized when LGBTQ people were fighting battles on multiple fronts against AIDS and for equal access to mainstream institutions like the right to marry and adopt. The fundamental sexuality of queerness went away for many people to find respectability in the mainstream society. But this is starting to come back in movements like pleasure activism. Pleasure activism is the organized struggle to reprioritize bliss and sensuality, to build individual and collective resilience, and ultimately as a necessary foundation to conjure better worlds. I'd like to share this quote from pleasure activism author Adrienne Marie Brown. "You're not going to forget the suffering in the world just because you had a great orgasm. You're going to have more resilience for turning and facing that suffering if you're also in touch with the part of your life that feels amazing, and not just the total catastrophes that are happening." Or as our favorite queer futurist of all time, Jose Esteban Munoz, put it in Cruising Utopia, "Some will say that all we have are the pleasures of this moment, but we must never settle for that minimal transport. We must dream and enact new and better pleasures, other ways of being in the world, and ultimately new worlds." Which this quote really fascinates me as someone who is always trying to come up with new ideas and new transformative, more accurate futures, more wild futures. That what if we actually based that not on technology, not on GDP, not on value, but on pleasure. And really our goal was to find new pleasure in new futures. That really excites me. And our last step in how to queer the future is hustling between worlds. So for a long time, to find companionship and work when neither were available to us in mainstream society, queer folks for millennia have been perceiving and repurposing spaces and platforms to seek their hidden layers, latent gigs, and the underground social networks, when any form of trade or hustling existed on the margins of respectable society. Queerness pioneered this rhythm of finding ad hoc latent opportunity, the hustle that now truly defines the future. Work, food, love, everything on demand if you know where and how to look. Only recently has proficiency of the hustle and juggling multiple hustles become an admired ability. By now you've heard of, used, or as you're watching me, are also getting notifications from a location-based smartphone app. But Grindr for gay men started it all. Launched less than 2 years after the iPhone, Grindr was an instantly game-changing tool for the hustle and changed the future of online dating. Rather than congregating in bars to find romance and limited by who else happened to be there, Grindr gave you the superpower to stay home and see the previously invisible layer of other guys near you. Grindr didn't invent mobile social networking, but it certainly did set an early model for how we come to think of our phones as secret decoders, revealing the latent possibilities surrounding us for everything from car rental to food delivery to romance. Futurist Madeline Ashby, who has done a great deal of speculative work and recently wrote How to Future, has this passage that I love that captures a lot about the relationship between hustling and the future. She writes, "For a long time, the future has belonged to people who have not had to struggle. And I think that will still be true. But as more and more systems collapse, currency, energy, the ability to get water, the ability to work, the future will increasingly belong to those who know how to hustle. And those people are not the people who are producing those purely optimistic futures. The future belongs to those who know how to hustle." And MJ Petroni, a local queer futurist and UX designer, in an interview, he talked about what he values looking for in queer employees. "We often look for people who have existed in lots of different worlds, and in walking back and forth between these spaces and never being fully at home, they learn a lot about the unspoken rules and assumptions and codes and values that exist." So I really wanted to try to answer the question, in these 5 traits, how can queering the future solve our most wicked problems? How can queering the future help anybody? And I hope that across these 5 skills or traits that show that queer folks across countries and millennia have demonstrated a nimble resilience, prosperity for adaptation and resourcefulness, a healthy skepticism and embrace for other worlds, a continual, if far from perfect practice of deep empathy that keeps us striving to do better, and a widespread acceptance of the connection between our biologies and our desires and achieving our destinies under any conditions. But on an even deeper level, we won't achieve transformative solutions to our most critical problems using the same legacy tools that we've used in the past. We need everyone to bring their ideas and engagement to bear on the complexity of the future. Yet 1.5 billion people currently live in 72 countries where homosexuality is illegal, and billions more live in countries without widespread cultural acceptance. And we know that being your full self makes a difference in your participation and your citizenship in a society or in a workplace. As one example, the Boston Consulting Group has found that the ability to be out at work helps workers feel twice as much psychological safety and 1.5 times more empowered and free to take creative risks. Imagine the other freedoms that billions of people lose being in the closet around the world every single day. But setting aside productivity or innovation on any measure, I want to end on this statistic, which I learned last year and has really become one of my North Stars. Researchers at the Family Acceptance Project at San Francisco State University, one question they're asked is, do you believe that you will ever be a happy LGBT adult? For queer youth who come from families rated extremely accepting, 92% are able to imagine themselves in happy futures. For queer youth from families who outright shun or reject them, only 35% have this ability. Think about that for a minute. 2/3 of LGBTQ young people who had the misfortune to be born to families that cannot accept them have lost the ability to imagine their future selves being happy. I can't see how losing that ability is any different from losing one's fundamental sense of hope for themselves, hope for the world, hope for their individual future or ours collectively. So it's phenomena like this that happen every day, anywhere an LGBTQ kid is growing up, knowing that they're different, afraid to express it, even in the most progressive regions, let alone the most conservative, that motivates me to keep queering the future and showing that the future can be queer. To create more scenarios with thriving queer protagonists, to uncover the trends that will particularly impact LGBTQ people, not just to preempt emerging victimhood, but also to empower them to grab the wheel and grab us by the future they see and deserve. To learn more about any of the LGBT Foresight research that I presented today, please check out the research home at queerthefuture.org. This has been me so far with the help of a lot of friends and experts and people, smarter people I'm talking to. But I would love this to be a home where anyone who identifies as a queer futurist, a trans futurist, a non-binary futurist, anywhere in the world can come and can share their ideas, and we can create collective visions for how we want our lives and our communities to live in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jason. This was really amazing to have you. I'm joining us tonight from my home just because of the heightened state of things in the pandemic. But thank you for joining us live from the interval tonight so that you can answer some of the questions that are coming in from our stream. Thank you so much for being here.
Happy to be here.
Great. Awesome. Well, I hope you enjoyed seeing the version of your talk. I'd love to just get into some of the questions that I had. I think one of the possibly the most provocative statement that you have in here is this idea of the queer vaccine, which, obviously vaccines couldn't be more on the forefront of all of our minds at the moment. But I don't think that's the one that people were thinking of being used, and obviously how provocative that is from a eugenics standpoint. So I'd love for you to just kind of unpack that a little bit more as to, I think what you were trying to say is that there are people in places in the world that are so persecuted that it could actually help suffering for those people, and that you can't take it off the table for people that might be killed because of their queerness.
Pretty much. I mean, every year our understanding of the genetics of homosexuality, of sexuality in general, our understanding of genetic technologies in general increases. And every year, every 2 years, we see the results of a giant, massive study looking at trying to identify the gay gene. And we're getting closer to the point where we haven't identified the gay gene yet. We think it may be multiple genes, but we hint at it in the video. It's this idea that there could be a mechanism by which we never have to identify the gay gene, but we can identify what affects that gene. For example, for every male fetus that was in a womb before the next one, that next fetus has a 33% greater chance of being born gay. So that we know there's something about the hormonal changes and positioning and balance in the womb that affects sexuality. So my concern, I mean, this is a wild card, low probability, but very high impact. is that we don't need to spend $50,000 to edit out the gay gene fetus by fetus. But we could work around that, never identify the gene itself, but just prevent it from activating. What if that was $1 a day supplement for a pregnant person? To reduce the chance of having a queer kid by 50% or greater. That was one of the first, putting all those that two and two together was one of the first times I felt kinship with my community. I felt a bit of kind of existential communal kinship, really. Like we could go extinct. What is there about? There have been evolutionary biology theories about why homosexuality forever, that we help raise the kids, that we are supplemental parents, that we mediate the tribe. But what if it were to disappear? What if we had the ability to make it disappear? I think there's a lot of, and this is the genesis of the research, I think there's a lot of queerness that's worth saving.
Indeed. I think to your point, when sonograms became available in certain countries and regions that basically kind of exalt male children, we've seen the female birth rate fall through the floor. And so,
Absolutely.
There's already kind of these levels of using technology for a eugenic or a societal kind of desire. And so you certainly could imagine in places where countries that are so violent and marginalized for queerness that those parents may choose to not have a queer child, for sure.
And to the way you frame the question, is preventing a queer child from being born in one of those conservative places, is that actually an act of compassion? I can't dismiss that possibility.
Right, and you can imagine parents making it from that place in their heart, obviously from a place of, I think, misunderstanding of what it is, but truly understanding how difficult that kid's life is going to be in their culture.
It's one of the, even in the most developed progressive places, it's one of the first, many ask any queer person, and their parents, one of their first reactions will be, when you come out, will be, I don't want you to have a hard life. And that's such a universal reaction that parents have upon coming out. It can only be when you have the potential to prevent that in a place where that life would be so tough. That's going to be a tough bioethical crossroads that we're facing.
No, and I think we're going to be facing this in all kinds of parts of genetic engineering, and we, as I said, there's already ways that we're finding it out for gender itself. I think, and we're already, when my daughter was born, they gave us all these host of tests that we could test for to decide if we wanted to have a kid that had various diseases. And so again, from the compassion of the parent's position, they may want to choose to not have that child. And it also kind of, it takes this whole realm of I think, a variation out of the human experience too, which is, I think, if all the kids were these blonde, blue-eyed, perfect, eugenic, kids that all had the same gender preference and non-queerness, then, I don't think that's the world that we actually want to live in, truly.
Yeah, I agree.
No, and I think to that point, I think, and we're seeing now a much more acceptance, at least in certain cultures, of queerness. Shows like Queer Eye having such a huge thing, and RuPaul's Drag Race being, this huge, kind of success and Emmy award-winning thing. That there's clearly a huge acceptance, at least in certain cultures, that queerness and otherness bring so much to our culture that these marginalized groups can help our culture in so many ways. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on why is it that the marginalized groups can bring us so much creativity and so much kind of fabulousness to our culture? What is it about the marginalization, do you think?
Well, as we hit in the video, I think there's when you choose to come out, when you choose to live the life that is, let's say queerness is 5 to 10% of the population, right? You are living your life against the 90% of that main street, and it's a double-edged sword. You no longer have the autopilot that many people have, that where the obvious next decision is made for you. Well, yes, I naturally get married and naturally have kids. but you also have so much more freedom to chart your own path. And I think to chart your own path, to explore ideas and arrangements and these spaces between binaries that we talked about, that when you're living in the margins, I mean, the margins are really the foundry of creativity, the foundry of the future. And I think a queer life just lends itself naturally to greater consideration, greater awareness of the choices that we're making, and also greater experimentation.
No, and I think, our previous speaker, Dr. Lonnie Brooks, who was talking about Afrofutures as well as Afro-queer futures, I think one of the things that he pointed out that was really eye-opening for me was this notion that that Black people have had to be futurists because their marginalized present was so difficult that in a way they had to project a better future for themselves in order to kind of have a present that they could live with. And I'm wondering, do you feel as though that's a similar thing for queer populations?
I do. I actually, I have I believe this is a saying of mine, that queer people make some of the best futurists because for most of our lives, we have had to hope that tomorrow will be better for us than today. That we will be more respected, more welcome, more accepted in the world of tomorrow, the world of next week and the world of next year, and than we have in today. And we know, yes, I'm losing my trajectory here, but yes, we're making progress, but it is scattershot progress. We are often going 2 steps forward, 1 step back. We're not there yet.
Yeah, and going back to some of the new technologies, I think some of the new technologies that may be coming in genetics may allow you said that some queer parents are seen as this extra set of parents, but I think what's coming very obviously is that there's already technologies where 2 people of the same gender can effectively generate a offspring, or even you can generate offspring based on only a single person's genetic material coming. So do you think that's going to change some of the outlooks and the ways we parent and the way we think about parenting?
I think it will, and what excites me is that that queer people may actually be able to perpetuate ourselves, no longer being this artifact or this rare mutation within the heterosexual population, within heterosexual reproduction, but that we could potentially perpetuate queerness ourselves. There's a fascinating study recently that children. I believe it was children or daughters of lesbian parents are more likely to have had same-sex experimentation, and that's the theory. The why is still up for grabs, of course, but something that being raised by queer parents creates more of a space for this experimentation, for choosing your own, for following your own path, following your own preferences, and deciding what's right for you. Which is really exciting.
Well, certainly, I mean, some of the statistics you're showing between Gen Z and the current generation, millennial generation, the last generation, Gen Z and the millennial generation, that there's the acceptance seems to also be allowing for so many more people to identify in a really profound way. I mean, we're crossing the 50% line of basically effectively gender for people
Right.
that feel free to identify as non-binary.
And part of that has been the terms. So I think, as I understand it, a lot of the young people have almost an allergic reaction to the terms, to the first generation of terms: lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. As the questions they're asked, are you gender fluid? Are you not exclusively heterosexual? As we talk more about these in between categories, and you don't have to fit into one distinct category or bucket with a 50-year past, 50-year legacy, and make a huge declaration, but just be fluid, to be open. That's when we're seeing these numbers really climb from the 5% that may be gay in older generations to the 50% who are identified as not as gender fluid or as not exclusively heterosexual, all the way down to Gen Z. So language is a part of it, but really just an understanding of this of spectrums and fluidity away from the categories from first generation. We are at least in third, fourth generation of LGBT culture and life and activism now, and it's I can't wait to see where it goes.
Right. Well, I want to come back to that a little bit. We also have a few questions coming in, and the first one from Kevin Kelly is organizing our questions, and kind of to this point of, do you think science should guide what we consider queer, or should we let that be a societal and a self expression? If we identify this gene, should be the only thing that we rely upon?
I think, I mean, queer is such a moving target. I mean, queer almost always needs something to exist in opposition against. I mean, queer is, how do I put it? I mean, queer really does need to be transgressive against a prevailing system. I think that what is the notion of what is queer will change over time. And I think identifying the gay gene, identifying a distinct biology, distinctive marker of of queerness, homosexuality, does not necessarily confer all these traits. And this is one nuance that hasn't come up yet is that queer is not necessarily gay. I mean, there are queerness and the LGBT is different than the Q in many respects. That queerness is a form of fluid homosexuality that really exists, I think, in active conversation and active opposition to a lot of mainstreams. And these are some of the traits I was meaning to identify. We have these queering. Not every LGBT person can queer the future in the way that someone who truly identifies and embodies queerness can. So I think that's an important distinction. Is really isolating what is queerness, what is it now, what has it been, and can we keep that kind of this non-assimilationist identity? Can we keep that? Can we preserve that going forward?
Well, that's interesting, and I think how this identity has kind of come out and been more accepted. And you mentioned things like the cafeteria and Stonewall riots, which and really how that it came from the Black trans community that really threw the first bricks in the windows, literally, of this fight. But I also feel as though, to a certain extent, they kind of got left behind in the movement, and we're just now starting to see them coming forward in the conversation much more than I think, let's say white gay men and even white lesbian women have been able to be accepted. And I'm not sure, is that because they could kind of pass in culture way more than obviously a kind of an out Black trans woman or man?
I mean, I think we have to look back at intersectionality, which we talked about. The intersection of racism, homophobia, transphobia. A transgender person of color, female-centered person of color, has many more against the mainstream expectation going for her, and so I think you look at this through an intersectional lens, and those stats about poverty, about hunger that we pulled up, for a lot of those stats, between those stats don't really tell the entire picture between let's say gay white men and straight white men. Those disparities are actually not, whiteness is a lot of privilege. But if you look at, what percentage of black queer or Black trans people live in poverty, then those numbers get so much higher. Those that we're talking a third or higher of people live in poverty, live in hunger. So we really need to map and understand the nuances within our community.
Well, I think to that point, we have a question here from Nick from YouTube feed. You mentioned, the kind of percentages of families that are more accepting and less accepting at this point. Luckily, it seems to be largely on, at least in the American culture, in a good trajectory. But what about the research into the ones that the kind of the 35% who live in families that are unaccepting but manage to stay accepting? Like how are we finding ways to support those kids, and how are they finding support themselves?
Yeah, I mean, something like a third, I want to say, I may butcher the numbers here, but a third up to 40% of homeless teens or young adults are LGBT, versus what, being 10% roughly of the population. So this is a real phenomenon. And luckily there are a lot of groups that are focusing on, queer kids, queer teens, queer young adults who have been rejected, who are living on the streets, and trying to specifically solve the multiple intersecting problems that they face, trying to get back on their feet without family resources. I mean, that's the idea of the chosen family is so important to queer communities, right? Since so many families are rejecting to some degree, right? Whether it's don't bring your partner home for Christmas, to don't ever come to my house again. That the idea of the notion of the chosen family, which is starting to spread from one of those innovations that started in queer culture and has such benefit and value that other people are adopting it. That the chosen family is really important. It's one of our survival adaptations, and I think survival under many conditions is one thing queerness excels at.
Nice. And we had one clarification question that I'd love to get from you is what is a chosen family? I don't think everyone is understanding that term.
Sure. Chosen family is parents. You come out to your parents. Often, depending on where you live, how your parents were raised, is religion a part of the family? Parents are often very rejecting. I know every LGBTQ person knows someone whose family has essentially shunned them, has said, you are not welcome here. They maybe talk once a decade. A chosen family is, you move away from, it's often rural to big city. And chosen family it's the people that are your new family. It's the people that they're a hybrid of their friends, their former lovers. They're the people that you whose shoulders you cry on, that you talk to, that know your life story. It's friendship plus, really. Think of it as a who would you invite to Thanksgiving if not for your own family? I think it's one. Thanksgiving is often where chosen family really manifests. Right? It's who would be around that very queer table, right?
Well, I want to thank you very much for this work and for giving this talk. We're coming across the top of the hour, but I'd love to give you a chance to maybe say a little bit about either where you're going with this work and or what your next work is. I know you've been affiliated with the Institute for the Future, and they've been supporting this work to some level, but I'd love to hear kind of what's your ecosystem of this work and where do you see it going next?
I want to keep pursuing this, quite honestly. This is, I really, as I mentioned at the very top of the video, I've been a futurist for 20 years. I have been basically out for about 20 years, and I'm finally feeling those converge. I want to explore both queer foresight. So I'm really starting to understand what are the future forces that will disproportionately disrupt the lives of LGBT people. We're talking automation. I think will disproportionately disrupt. These natural resource depletion will disproportionately disrupt poverty, hunger, and so that we can begin to future-proof my community, future-proof us as a subculture, but then also to explore this queering as a toolkit, queering as a mindset. I'm going to get, as much as there may be some trouble brewing in the comments right now, I'm going to get in trouble for even implying that queerness could be could be turned into a toolkit or a utility. I think that, but I absolutely think there's a lot that queerness has through struggle, through pain, through violence, through death, has mastered. And that I think needs to be shared and can help a lot of other people going forward. So I think queer futures, in short, I think is, hopefully that carries me through as a futurist.
Nice. Well, I'm reminded when you say that one of my favorite principles of longevity, which was kind of coined around the discovery of the bristlecone pine tree, the longest lived single species, was that adversity breeds longevity, and that things that live in the most difficult environments are often the most long lived. And we see this, I think, with institutions, cultures, biology, and I'm hoping that at least through some of the adversity, some good things are going to be coming out of it. And thank you very much for joining us, and look forward to hearing more of your work in the future.
Thank you very much for hosting me.
Thank you. And I want to thank you, our audience, for joining us. The recording of this will be up in perpetuity, and I hope that you can join us for some of our future talks. We have some amazing things planned for the rest of 2021, which I'm hoping will even bring us back to some in-person events at some point in the future. So thank you very much.